Frederick, after escaping his near assassination, is no longer a lieutenant, but he managed to find his way out of the rushing river he used to escape his certain death. He walked through the marshlands of the Venetian plain and found his way onto a military freight train headed west toward the seaport town of Venice. He's hiding out and awaiting an uncertain future as a new deserter/civilian. My name's Trisha Slapizio. I'm your host for Tea and Bedtime Stories. In this episode, we'll continue reading Ernest Hemingway's novel, A Farewell to Arms. Last time we read and discussed chapter 31, and now I'll continue the story with chapter 32, and this will finish book 3. After the reading, I'll follow up with a few quick facts and my impressions. So let's begin reading chapter 32. Lying on the floor of the car with the guns beside me under the canvas, I was wet, cold, and very hungry. Finally, I rolled over and lay flat on my stomach with my head on my arms. My knee was stiff, but it had been very satisfactory. Valentini had done a fine job. I had done half the retreat on foot and swum part of the Tagliamento with his knee. It was his knee, all right. The other knee was mine. Doctors did things to you, and then it was not your body anymore. The head was mine, and the inside of the belly. It was very hungry in there. I could feel it turn over on itself. The head was mine, but not to use, not to think with, only to remember, and not too much remember. I could remember Catherine, but I knew I would get crazy if I thought about her when I was not sure yet I would see her, so I would not think about her, only about her a little, only about her, while the car was slowly and clickingly in some light through the canvas and my lying with Catherine on the floor of the car. Hard as the floor of the car, not to lie, not thinking, only feeling. Having been away too long, the clothes wet and the floor moving, only a little each time, and lonesome inside, and alone with wet clothing and a hard floor for a wife. You do not love the floor of a flat car, nor guns with the canvas jackets and the smell of Vaselined metal, or a canvas that rain leaked through, although it is very fine under a canvas and pleasant with guns, but you loved someone else, whom now you knew was not even to be pretended there. You seeing now very clearly and coldly. Not so coldly as clearly and emptily. You saw emptily, lying on her stomach, having been present when one army moved back and another came forward. You had lost your cars and your men, and as a floor walker loses the stock of his department in a fire, there was, however, no insurance. You were out of it now. You had no more obligations. If they shot floor walkers after a fire in the department store because they spoke with an accent that they had always had, then certainly the floor walkers would not be expected to return when the store opened again for business. They might seek other employment, and if there was any other employment and the police did not get them. Anger was washed away in the river along with any obligation, although that ceased when the carabinieri put his hands on my collar. I would like to have had the uniform off, although I did not care much about the outward forms. I had taken off the stars, but that was for convenience. It was no point of honor. I was not against them. I was through. I wished them all the luck. There were good ones, and the brave ones, and the calm ones, and the sensible ones, and they deserved it. But it was not my show anymore, and I wished this bloody train would get to Mestre, and I would eat and stop thinking. I would have to stop. Piani would tell them that they had shot me. They went through the pockets and took the papers of the people they shot. They would not have my papers. They might call me drowned. I wondered if they would hear in the States. dead from wounds and other causes. Good Christ, I was hungry. I wondered what had become of the priest at the mess, and Rinaldi. He was probably at Pordenone. If they had not gone further back, well, I would never see them now. I would never see any of them now. That life was over. I did not think he had syphilis. It was not a serious disease anyway, if you took it in time, they said. But he would worry. I would worry too if I had it. Anyone would worry. I was not made to think. I was made to eat. My God, yes. Eat and drink and sleep with Catherine. Tonight, maybe. No, that was impossible. But tomorrow night. And a good meal and sheets, and never going away again except together. Probably have to go damned quickly. She would go. I knew she would go. When would we go? That was something to think about. It was getting dark. I lay and thought where we would go. There were many places. That concludes the reading of chapter 32 and the conclusion of book 3. There are 9 chapters left in this series, in this novel. So we'll pick up where we left off next time. So a few quick facts and then my impressions. If you remember, Valentini was the surgeon who operated on his knee when he was wounded by the mortar shells. A floor walker, if you didn't pick that up, it's just a retail sales clerk in a department store. And basically they're just the people that walk around and keep people from stealing, folding sweaters and whatnot, and assisting. So he's referring to himself as basically just a clerk in a department store, which I think is a pretty good analogy. And if you remember when he was talking about the Carabinieri, that is the name for the Italian military police who tried to seize him and shoot him for just being an officer with an accent. Pordenone is a town in northern Italy. It's located about 35 miles east of Udine, where the story started. So it's kind of like a full circle, I guess, moment. And if you remember, syphilis is the venereal disease that's contracted through unprotected sexual contact that his roommate, Rinaldi, was suspected of contracting. So those are all the quick facts that I have. My impressions, I don't know. There's an episode of the sitcom Friends in season 3 where one of the characters, Joey, is reading a book that he's reading The Shining, and he puts it in the freezer whenever it gets to a dramatic part in the story. It's kind of adorable. But in a weird way, I've had to put this book in the freezer a few times. Figuratively, of course, because I'm just reading a digital copy off my phone. But it's just too much for me sometimes. This story is not at all what I expected, and it's a lot. A common sentiment about Hemingway's writing, what people say often, is that it's easy to read, but tough to read at the same time. It's really tough to take, I guess, is the sentiment. Meaning you don't have to have a large vocabulary to understand the writing, but you do need a strong disposition in order to take what he's talking about. His writing is simplistic and it's accessible, but the subject matter is so complex and it hits really hard. I don't know if you feel that way. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. But this book has been really tough for me to read. This passage in particular really hit home for me. I've, like him, experienced some bodily injuries in my life. One from a motorcycle accident, one just, I broke my ankle. It was a spiral fracture. But I know the feeling of reliving that trauma every time a new, totally unrelated trauma occurs. You know, he's like face down in the train car hiding out, but he's trying to survive his current situation, and he starts to think about his knee surgery right off the bat. And I've been there, because it's a stark reminder that he's still alive. it's also a reminder of what he's already overcome and of his strength and resiliency. And Frederick is experiencing the sociological phenomenon that's called anomie or anomie. It's basically a normlessness, a feeling of normlessness, and displacement in our psychology that comes from traumatic loss, right? As he waits in the train car, he becomes acutely aware that he has lost nearly everything. And along with that, all sense of normality. And there's no going back to the way things were before. So everything at this point in his life has changed. He is not the same man. And his mind is swimming as he tries to make sense out of what's left of his identity, right? Now that the external markers of who he was are now gone. Right? He's talking about his uniform and the outward appearance, and it speaks to how much we rely on the world around us to inform us and reinforce our beliefs about ourselves, right? And when those things vanish, our entire self-concept, meaning who we know ourselves to be, becomes extremely fragile and frankly untrustworthy. So in a weird way, it's like our house of cards has crumbled and we're trying to figure out how to rebuild it. And so what he's describing for us here does happen to most people at some point in their lifespan. Anomie occurs when we experience any extreme changes in social, economic, or political structures, right? And so it could be the devastation of a physical landmark, right? Like the hill you hike up every day has a forest fire and now there's a burn scarp there, right? So it's a physical devastation. Or it could be a more metaphorical system collapse, like when your family falls apart from divorce or death or something. And it triggers this form of mental breakdown because obviously your world is breaking down around you. It's really hard to process that. And so anything can trigger it. It could be as serious as encountering and surviving a life-threatening incident like he just did, or it could be from a natural disaster where your life is threatened just by circumstances beyond your control, or it could be as seemingly benign as retiring, right? You just retire from your job. You no longer have to get up in the morning. You have to rebuild your life in a new way because those external structures are gone, even if they're abstract. But anything that is immediately disruptive, and the key here is norm altering, can cause this form of anomic disorientation. And if you've never experienced profound loss, it will be difficult to understand fully. But if you have, like me, this hits like a brick, even though it's really understated and it's a really short chapter. But I just find it fascinating. He quickly disassociates, been there, done that, as a method of coping, right? You just pick up the pieces and start trying to figure out what to do next. If you've ever watched footage of people after like an earthquake or something, they just look so disoriented, almost like zombies walking around. And that's what this feels like for me anyway, because I remember that. And I think his disassociation is his way of trying to stabilize his emotional turmoil, right? His attachment might seem supernatural, but it is a common reaction to these kinds of traumatic events. I also think it's interesting that he's taking inventory of his surroundings. Like, he's literally taking stock of what's left of his former life. Through his thought processes, he's clearly searching for some kind of motivation to keep going, while also trying to make sense out of, right, whatever's left of his life. And he's responding viscerally because, right, the abstract parts of his life have vanished, and so all he has is the here and now. And so he's describing his physical surroundings, which I find pretty brilliant. Here, Hemingway is trying to impart deep insights into the human psyche without too many words, with very few words, as a matter of fact. And I think it's fascinating how effortlessly he was able to envelop the reader into the scene. Again, if you know, you know. And you can feel it. You're there with him because you've experienced that before. Anyway, trauma kind of begets more traumatic thoughts, in my experience. But it's also interesting that fans of his writing deeply admire the stoic nature of his lead characters, and some even try to emulate this style of detachment, seeing it as brave or heroic in some way. And in my experience, that can be really unwise to suppress our emotions. It's an effective strategy for a temporary fix, but our strongest feelings don't dissipate easily, and they have a habit of coming back to haunt us, usually at the most inopportune times, unfortunately. And we have to remember that our minds are storage facilities with limited capacities, right? We can only store so much, and before we know it, if we're trying to store too much, we become completely overwhelmed and often don't even understand how it happened. And it's because we're suppressing, or our mind is repressing traumatic thoughts because it just can't deal with them. So you have to make it a point to go back and revisit. This is just my experience. Sorry if I sound preachy, but you got to go back and revisit your feelings in a safe space and time, because they always catch up to you, and they always wreak havoc when they manifest in chaotic ways. So anyway, that's just my little preach. I really envy people who can express their emotions constructively. I personally struggle with emotional expression. Sometimes I don't feel things as strongly as I think I should or would like to. And so I don't express them when I probably should, but it's a great skill to acquire. I'm still working on it. I honestly wish we could teach it as part of our elementary curriculum. I think people would be much more contented and peace-loving if they could feel better. Just feel better, right? If you can, it makes sense that if we can find ways to, better ways to feel more quickly, then we can feel better more quickly, right? If we can better feel, then we can feel better. That's just my thoughts. But I think that's what Ernest was covertly trying to describe here, is those feelings of anomie and the devastation that happens when you lose your identity. Anyway, I think his writing, as tough as it is to take, it's still really insightful, and I'm glad that I found a way to come back to this material. Anyway, that's all I have for chapter 32 of book 3. So in the next episode, we'll pick up where we left off with chapter 33. We'll begin book 4 of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Please join me again for more tea and bedtime stories. I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for listening.